Okay, so this has become a little bit of a complicated rack. So I'm going to kind of go back to the drawing board just a little bit on it, and hopefully we can kind of get a bit somewhere with it. So what I've got so far, I'll forget about this assembly one because it became a little bit too convoluted as I was working on it. But what we have so far is I've made a Reese. Just make sure the levels aren't too. Yes. Yeah, cool. That should be alright at about that level anyway. So got a Reese. That's a super simple one. We're just going to go the square, second square, detune it a little bit, add in a sub, put it up an octave so it's at the same level as well. Big fat square, okay, give some positive tuning. Cool, anyway. So what I've done is I've made a couple of racks. The first one is a band split. Has a low band and a high band. You can see it coming there. That's the high band, that's the low band. And we're going to be using these two bands to split the signal. And we want to cut a little bit of space in the mids as well. Yep, I think that's probably close enough to what we want. All right. So I've got the band split. We then have a filter. It's a filter that goes, it's easy if you see it. We can change the slope from 12 dB to 24. Got the resonance mappable. We can morph it from a high pass to a band pass to a low pass. And I've got a frequency control. Now I won't be using all of these, but it's good to have the options available so I don't have to stick around and go right into the heart of it. Essentially, we'll be modulating the frequency in the morph. Give some cool filter shapes. And I'm not sure whether I'll be using 12 or 24 slope, because I'll probably have multiple instances of this filter anyway. So yeah, the other point is that I've automated the gain. So normally if you've got a filter, I'll just demonstrate by dropping in a new one. Auto filter, set it to a band pass because it's most obvious. But if you go from a band pass that's 24 dB slope to a 12, there's a very, very big increase in gain. So what I've done here, I've just set it up so when you use the switch from 12 to 24, it activates a utility that'll change the volume. Honestly, it's still kind of noticeable. Let's maybe go 6. Yeah, that's close enough. By the time it's all compressed and everything, it won't be such a big deal. The next rack I have is a notching rack. Now, I use a lot of notches in my sound at various points. This particular one is a notch that also happens to sweep up and down the frequency bands. And it also controls, I'll show you actually, I've got it set to morph, and there's a rate function that gives it a kind of wobble. I like it because it adds additional layers of movement. Yeah, boost morph with those same controls that we want. Easily accessible, so we can change the rate, the slope, and the resonance. Okay, the next one is a little bit different. It's a gain control where we're not actually controlling the output of the saturator, we're controlling the volume going into the saturator. So we can get some interesting tones. We'll keep it at -12 for now, but this will be used within the rack itself. It won't be a macro that we normally access. Okay, the next one is the sub frequency, which is just a low pass filter with changeable resonance. And that will be kind of hidden in the rack. The idea is that we'll use this to line up with the actual frequency of the sub, so we can boost it if we want to. Okay, the next one is a very cool one. It is a saturator with OTT driving it as a bass. So check it out. If I set it to no drive, have a listen. The bass is being boosted while everything else stays the same. Now, if we give it some gain, let's try with 6 dB. Getting some cool tones, and if we increase the drive, it pretty much compresses so much that all you can hear is the bass. It's really cool. And it will become apparent later on the purpose of it. Cool. All right, what do we have next? Yeah, then I've got an oscilloscope. I'm not sure if you can see it on here or not. Let's have a look. Nah. But yeah, I've got an oscilloscope as well because that's helpful to see the effects of everything. I've got a second OTT running after that as well. Now, what I will be doing is taking this Reese that we have here, this boring little Reese sound, and I'm going to start assembling these racks because these little modules, as I like to think of them, they're just part of the process. It's just a time-saving aspect. Anyway, so let's get started. So initially we are going to split the bands. So we've got a low and a high frequency. So let's open that up. You can see the low band here. That's interesting. What is going on here? Oh, that's cool. OTT is bringing out other frequencies that really shouldn't be there, but okay. So I've split it. Now, I'm going to get my little book because this is an extremely complicated rack. Okay. Tell you, it's cool having like a laptop as a keyboard because it gives me like a secondary sort of screen that I can use as a book stand. So let's deal with the low end first. We'll turn off this OTT for the time being. So we've got a sub. Nice. Okay. So I'm going to saturate it just a little bit. So drop in a saturator. And let's give it maybe like 1.5. Let's have a listen to that. Now I'm modulating the bass control. That tells us what's happening to the subs. Yeah, let's have it at like -3. And I'm going to look at the oscilloscope, see what's happening there. So we're just getting a fairly modulating sub, and if I turn the saturator on, it's just like a tiny boost. So let's give it 3 dB, see how that sounds. Nah, too much of a square. Go with 1.5. Nice. I'm turning the rest of the res off for the time being, so I can see what I'm dealing with a bit better. Yeah, we're just getting a boosted signal, which is really all we want so far anyway. All right, next step is to put the sub control on top of that. Easy thing to do. So I'm just going to drag and drop sub control here, put that on afterwards, and we're keeping it turned off for the time being. So let's just leave it completely open, because that's probably the best way to deal with it so far. It's not affecting the sound anyway. Okay, so let's look at the high band. The first step, and I was trying to do this last night, and it was actually like more complicated than I really thought it would be, because I didn't expect to get so many options just out of using saturator. Like, I'm getting really into saturator. It's a bloody awesome effect. So anyway, after the high pass split, we are going to, actually no, at the high pass split, group it, give it a name, high split, high clean / wet. Wet and dry is probably a good way to put it. Try and be consistent, and we're going to duplicate it. The first one we will call dry, and we don't do anything to it. The second one we call wet, and this is where some pretty cool stuff will happen. Let's have a listen. Okay. And if I look at the, yeah, if I look at the oscilloscope, it's just going nuts at the moment. See if I can, nah, I'm not getting anything out of it. Okay, whatever. So with the wet, we're going to drop an instance of saturator before the high pass. It's actually very important to have it before the high pass, because we are going to start playing with distorting certain frequencies that we pick. So we're going to have an EQ8, a saturator, then the high pass EQ8, and in between we are putting utility. Now, we're going to set it to wave shaper, give it a bit of a curve. Just wondering how much. No, let's go sinoid fold to begin with. It's a massive gain boost already, so drop it by -6. Cool. And we're just going to start playing around with frequencies and listening to how they affect the sound. So let's get a shelf going. Increase the gain of the shelf on the first equalizer, and let's just see what happens. And this is quite cool because what's happening here is we're boosting the frequencies at 122 hertz and below, and we're hearing the effect of the harmonics, but we're actually cutting out those frequencies. So the only sounds that actually remain are the harmonics that are created. It's very cool. There we're boosting like 30 hertz at the maximum degree possible. Let's try giving it some extra drive. It's so cool, the effects you can get from this. All right, now we can maybe set it to wave shape and then start playing with it a bit more. So you're already getting some quite aggressive tones out of this, and really all we've done is we're changing the input gain. Let's add in that frequency sweep. Now, if we were to turn the high pass at the end off, let's have a listen. See, like, we're actually allowing a lot to come through. See, that's the second harmonic. Yeah, it's a lot of interesting tones through very little. So we are going to put all these together and work out how to control them, because there's a lot of effects we can get from only a couple of parameters there. So I think the most important ones are going to be the input gain, the frequency, see, that's almost like a low pass filter. That's really cool. Jesus, see, there's so many things we can play with. Yeah, very cool tones we're getting. Okay, so how about... See, that's just the saturator reacting. Okay, so we're going to have it set up in such a way that when we're boosting the gains, we're also dropping the gains. And in my opinion, the easiest way to do that in Ableton is to use an LFO. Like, we could just map, for instance, gain to macro 1, drive to macro 1, and then we're controlling it's up to 36, whatever. But I really hate these MIDI numbers of 0 to 127. I prefer percentages or like straight numbers. So in this instance, I think the best way to do it would be to use an LFO, and we can use the offset as the controller. So firstly, we're going to map it to the utility gain. Yeah, I think that's a good way to do it. Cool. And we can also control a second output at the end. Or what have we got? Negative 36, and we're going up positive 36. Let's try doing an inversion. So for 100 to 0, that hypothetically should balance it. But it's not working because we're essentially turning off the saturator by the time it gets there. So we'll use a second utility, have that at the very end of the chain. Actually, no, before the high pass filter. And we will map the gain there as well. Now here we're going to invert it. So when it's at 0, it will be 0 for both. As it goes up, it goes down. Now the trick is to balance it because we don't want it to go all the way down. So let's set it at 100% and let it go down by like 12 dB. That might work. Let's have a listen. And we don't have to worry too much about the gain because, of course, everything's going to be compressed to death anyway. Actually, have we got the OTT running? No, we don't. If we did, it would be toning this down a lot already. Let's have a test of that. Actually, let's just turn off the utility and see if the OTT is enough. Yeah. Hell, let's just rely on the OTT to control the gain. So goodbye utility. So now we have a percentage control for the input. And let's see what happens if we give it some drive, 6 dB. God damn, that OTT is doing a lot. It's boosting bass frequencies that are like implied and not even there. It's pretty cool. Okay, so we have our utility control here. Goes from -11 to +12, which is probably enough. So let's map that to macro 1, call that pre-gain. Then we're going to map the drive to macro, I don't know, 3. Yeah. Map the frequency to macro 4. Call that shelf frequency. And map the gain to, let's say, 5. Shelf gain. Now, I don't want to kind of notch with the shelf gain. So I'm going into the mapping, trying to find the shelf gain, and I want the minimum to be 0, the maximum to be 15. Shelf frequency, yeah, that's cool. Input gain, 0 to 100%. High frequency, wet, dry, and the saturator, let's go from 0 to 12. Now let's check the gain balances there. Is OTT still on? Yes. See, that's a ridiculous amount of tone just from a really simple thing. So let's set everything to its like baseline. So cool. All right. And the dry also has that mapped as well. Okay, cool. And the final thing, what happens? Yeah, let's just map the dry wet to macro 6. Saturator D/Y. Cool. Set that to 6. Cool. Now we can actually delete the wet chain. We can test it. See, exactly the same. So I've made a dry wet split without actually having to split the damn thing, so that's a bit easy. Let's test it. Nice. I'm not worrying too much about like CPU usage at this stage. Maybe when I kind of finish it up, we can think about that. But okay, so we've gone some way down the path anyway, so that's something. The next step is to put in the morphing module, which is this filter here. So open that up. Now what's going on? See, the OTT sometimes brings out too much, which can actually not be a good thing. Let's test that out. Some of these gain things. God, that really sounds like like from voodoo people or something. Cool, okay. Because we're compressing these things, it's not such a big deal. Okay, so morph, and then the morphing notch version. Okay, so I'm duplicating that. Now we're going into here and we are going to change the LFO controls. Now, currently it's going from 0 to 50. We want it to go from 100 to 50, which should make the center a notch. Nice. Give it a bit of resonance, 20%. Cool. So now we have a morphing band pass that then runs into a morphing notch. Cool. Cool. Getting a lot of tones. Doing very little so far. Nice. Okay. The next step is the notch modules. We're going to have 2. So duplicate, turn them both on. And these are just going to kind of cycle in and out of each other. And we'll just kind of let them run and do their own thing at that stage, because it's not really our concern. Cool. All right, so notch, notch, then we're going to glue it together, and then we distort with the pre-gain distortion, which is similar. Let's have a listen. Cool, so we better put in a compressor after the notches because we'll lose a lot of gain. So the output's pretty good so far. Okay. So the next step is to blend these all together. So since we got to this stage, we can finally do the blend back together, and we're going to merge it with a bit of saturation. In this instance, a bit warmer. Let's check that it works. Cool. Cool. All right. It's about to get even more complicated, so this is a good point for me to save because it will become hell tomorrow. So I'll start her up again tomorrow.